I think one of the most important scenes in One Piece is when Whitebeard in his final moments talks about a coming great war that will engulf the entire world. This is a future Roger himself had told Whitebeard about, and a future Roger had seen after he'd found the One Piece. For 15 real-life years since Whitebeard's last scene, fans have predicted that this final war will be the ultimate climax of the One Piece series, where it will be the last act of the story, depicting the biggest war ever shown in manga. And now, over a decade after Whitebeard's death, this final war is about to start. In the latest chapter of One Piece, the story word for word repeats Whitebeard's final message, saying that the conflict he spoke of all those years ago has now come. These are words said by Kunko, who in the original Japanese uses the phrase Kyodaina Tatakai, meaning Great War or Gigantic War, which are the exact same words said by Whitebeard right before he died. But there are also other times in the story when these words are spoken. The Roger pirates themselves also spoke of this same Kyodaina Tatakai after they'd learned of the future, and they described it as a war that will split the very seas. Later, Kyodaina Tatakai is also used by Vegapunk to describe the war that took place during the Void Century over 800 years ago, where Vegapunk said that this war would finally be succeeded in the current era. The interpretation fans years ago made that this war Whitebeard spoke about would be the finale of the One Piece story was apparently completely correct, and it very much looks like the manga will end with a literal world war. But what I think fans have still not fully realized is the actual scale of this event. I think the image a lot of fans have of the final war is Luffy gathering all his allies and having his last battle against the world government. But this is not actually what the story is building the final war up to be. The final war is not set up to be a war like the ones we saw during Marineford or Wano, but a literal world war. The words Whitebeard used to describe this war were Sekai Chuo Makikomu, which mean engulfing the world. And these exact words were once again echoed by Kunko in the newest chapter. This also gets brought up by both the Roger Pirates and Vegapunk, where the conflict they talk about is said to involve the entire planet. Where Marineford was one arc set on one island, the final war is set up to occur throughout the entire setting, which very likely means that it will span over several islands and occur over the course of multiple arcs. If we are currently in the opening stages of this conflict, we've arguably already gotten a taste of what this final war will be like. Where ever since the final saga started, we've began seeing huge battles take place all over the One Piece planet, far beyond just the island where the Straw Hats happen to be. I think this is something that will keep happening in the final war, where even though we may well see a climactic battle where Luffy goes to the Holy Land and takes on the entire world government, this in itself wouldn't be the final war, but simply one battle in this huge conflict that will span the entire planet. I think what the One Piece story is essentially doing is trying to portray what a genuine world war would look like in this setting. World wars and similar large-scale conflicts in real life always start small and only keep escalating, and it is often only later in hindsight decided which event was the starting point. If you for example look at both of the world wars, neither conflict began with all of the major powers involved, and this is something that only happened later, as the war kept on getting bigger and bigger. Very interestingly, Kunko's words in this chapter could very well be seen as a sign that in the One Piece story, the world war is going to officially start on the island of Elbaf. Kunko actually brings up another key detail about the final war in this chapter, where she reveals that the allegiance of the giants is going to shape the coming conflict. I think Kunko's words here are super important and actually give a big clue to the relationship between the world government and the giants. Elbaf's importance to the final war was arguably already hinted earlier in this arc, when Gaban said that Elbaf no longer being safe meant that the world was truly ending. Gaban was with Roger when he went to Laugh Tale, so he literally knows about the future and that the final war is coming. Since Kunko and Gaban both have knowledge of the future, they could in fact be talking about the same thing in these two scenes. The battle over Elbaf's allegiance could actually be the prophesied starting point of the final war. One big thing we've learned about the world government throughout the One Piece story is that they are absolutely obsessed with harnessing the power of the giants. The government mass recruits giants to serve in the Marines, has spent years trying to research the technology of gigantification, they kidnap orphans from Elbaf, and as we've now learned in this newest chapter, they were even in bed with Elbaf's royalty, and tried to turn the entire country into their mercenaries. In Punk Hazard, Law speculated that the reason for the government's obsession was just that they wanted powerful soldiers out of the giants. And while this could still be partly true, Kunko's words paint a bit of a different picture. All of the government's efforts to control the giants could have actually been because of this prophecy about their importance in the final war. I think this could also explain the motives behind Gaban's character, and why he has decided to live on Elbaf of all places. Gaban only came to the island after he'd learned the truth of the world on Laugh-Tale. Something that gets repeated a lot in One Piece is that the Roger pirates literally learned everything, which to me means that they know everything the world government knows about the future, and even more. And this likely means that Gaban had learned what Kunko spoke of the giants' importance in the coming war. I think Gaban may have specifically decided to come to Elbaf because he knew the government would attempt to subjugate the giants in the future. This also makes me wonder if Gaban knowing this means that he also played a role in whatever happened between Harald and Loki. If Gaban knew the government in the future would make a move on Elbaf, and he had specifically come to the island to stop it, Gaban would have been in a good position to discover Harald's secret relationship with them. Kunko talking about the final war in this chapter also highlights one really important aspect of the conflict. Nobody in the story actually knows how the war will go down. While Kunko does know that the war will come and that the giants will be important, even she does not know who the giants will side with. This is consistent with literally every character we've heard talking about the final war, where they only know bits and pieces of what will happen. Whitebeard, Roger, and even Joy Boy himself all had no idea who would win the war, or who would end up finding the One Piece. Essentially, even characters who know about the future of the story are working with incomplete information, and nobody has the full picture of how the final war will turn out. What this means is that, even if you dislike Luffy being the second coming of Joy Boy, and think that this makes him the chosen one, that's where all the prophecies end. And there are no prophecies about Luffy saving the world or even finding the One Piece. It is to me really cool that the story keeps making Whitebeard such a relevant character even after all these years, where he somehow keeps popping up arc after arc even though he's dead. Beyond this scene of Kunko echoing Whitebeard's final words, other interesting things happened in this chapter as well. I talked about it a bit before, but this chapter pretty much finally admitted that King Harald had some sort of deal with the world government, but this actually made me reconsider my thoughts about Harald. My idea for weeks now was that Harald was deliberately pacifying Elbaf to make it vulnerable to a world government occupation, but in this chapter, Saint Sommers is actually mad at Harald for having done this, saying that the government wanted the giants to stay strong so that they could be their soldiers. I suppose this implies that while Harald did have a deal with the government, at some point he actually went rogue and decided to deliberately weaken Elbaf. The only reason I can think of for Harald doing this is that maybe he thought the giants would be left alone if they were no longer useful soldiers, but clearly based on the current arc, that ended up not being true. Saint Sommers specifically being mad at Harald is also surprising, because previously he talked about Shamrock possibly visiting Harald's grave, which I had thought meant that the Celestial Dragons genuinely respected him. Maybe it is possible that Shamrock was actually the only Celestial Dragon who had a relationship with Harald, and the rest simply saw him as a tool. This could imply that Shamrock was actually the mastermind behind this Elbaf conspiracy, which would be pretty wild, since in the timeline, he would have been a young man in his early 20s when everything with Harald went down. This chapter also makes it appear like Saint Sommers has a message he's going to broadcast to the entire island through the gigantic Denden Mushi. It could be that Sommers will simply give the giants an ultimatum, where he'll tell them to serve the government or suffer the little children. But considering what he talked about in this chapter, I also have an inkling that Sommers could maybe just spill the beans about Harald to the whole country. I'm not entirely sure what he'd gain from doing this, but he also might think that he has nothing to lose, and Sommers has already shown that he enjoys screwing with people just for the sake of it. Also, Gillingham going through all this trouble to get the Denden Mushi, only to have Sommers talking to it instead, to me basically implies that Sommers is his boss. Sommers hasn't been revealed to have any special rank in the God's Knights, but I suppose what could make him superior to Gillingham is that Sommers comes from the Shepherd family, which is likely one of the more important celestial dragon families, as they literally have a seat among the 5 elders. While on the topic of the elders, Kunko showed another one of their special abilities in this chapter, where she is able to regenerate her body just like the Gorosei did on Egghead. This confirms that the God's Knights are in possession of multiple of the elders' special powers, and not just the use of magic circles. It looks like they don't have all of the abilities though, as Carlin clearly did not have the elders' longevity, and the God's Knights still talk to each other through long distances via Denden Mushi, instead of through telepathy like the elders. They could, however, in theory still have the telekinesis ability that Saturn used, or I guess, other special powers we haven't even yet seen. This chapter did give some more hints about how strong the God's Knights actually are, where so far, we've basically known that they're strong, but it's been hard to say just how strong. Kunko does pretty damn well against the Straw Hats, but what I find interesting is that she doesn't exactly overpower them, but instead outmaneuvers all of their attacks. This could be seen as her just deciding to play around with the crew. If the Gorosei are any reference, the only known way to damage her could be through Conqueror's Haki, which none of the Straw Hats here have. Honestly though, I'm still not convinced that there aren't other ways to get through the Celestial Dragon's regeneration. I at least hope this is the case, since I believe the story is much richer if you can still be a top tier without Conqueror's Haki being a requirement. Even more so than Kunko, I think Sommers is actually the one who came off looking real strong in this chapter, where he was able to easily beat Saul. The Egghead arc built Saul up as being strong even among Vice Admirals, and even though he's now maimed and retired, I think dominating him is still a solid feat. But what I think is a lot more noteworthy here is that Robin decides to hide from Sommers. Robin is actually really strong, and we know that she can defeat characters like Black Maria, so her deciding to hide from Sommers to me makes him look at the very least much stronger than characters like the Flying Six. I personally still doubt these knights are on the level of the Monster Trio or anything like that, but they at least appear to be strong enough to make for good antagonists for the rest of the crew. I also still think the story has something big planned for Kunko, where we keep giving her focus chapter after chapter. She not only got to echo Whitebeard's words here, but I genuinely think she has the most creative fighting style of any new One Piece character we've seen in hundreds of chapters. She just keeps pulling off new ways of using her devil fruit, and I'm not sure if we've ever had a fighter in this story who specializes in redirecting their enemies' attacks. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on Kunko, you should definitely check out this video, because I break down why she's way more special of a devil fruit user than you may think. I thought this one small panel where both Lilith and Bonnie are cheering on Franky for beating the Thundercloud was honestly pretty adorable. Back when the Egghead arc started, both of these two were against the Straw Hats, and Bonnie even thought of the crew as rivals. So it's pretty cool that both Lilith and Bonnie have now basically become fans. Oh, and after all these weeks, we finally get an interesting development in this cover story, where Ulti wants to serve Yamato. Maybe I'm wrong, but I do think we're setting up this cover story ending with the birth of Yamato's very own pirate crew. If this actually ends up happening, I wonder if there could be other possible recruits in this cover story than Ulti and Page 1. I speculated in a prior video about Apu showing up in this cover story, but I'd 100% advise against Yamato recruiting him, where I think even Elbaf doesn't have snakes as big as Apu. That's really it for the video. Big thanks to all my victims for all their bounty, and if you also want to get your wallet plundered by me channel, click the join button and you'll get access to me members only content, and I'll also add ye to me ledger of victims. Anyway, appreciate you guys for watching this video to the end. Take care.